warmly welcoming you all back to this our show, ThinkTech Hawaii's Humane Architecture, happening to be the 355th episode, and you're around to be the 21,500th or what viewer if you're on YouTube, but if you watch it like on that website of ThinkTech, it's going to be more. But you know, quantity is only one thing. Quality is more important. So we're back here to talk about the another First Amendment, which it should be, and that's actually housing or sheltering. And so we have our panel back here from all over the world with you, Pedro Capriata in Barcelona. Hi, Pedro. Welcome back.
Hi.
And we have you, Jay, here with us in Honolulu, Hawaii. Hi, Jay. So covering that news anchory part, which is actually related to, and we started at the very bottom here in the middle. So the world has a new pope. And it's a blend of you guys, because half he's American, the first American, and we show a picture, so it's not the one who had AI depicted that he wanted to be the pope. Luckily, it's not him. But his other half is Peruvian, right? So that's a good blend of both of you guys. So I leave it with that for now. But I'm moving up all the way to the top of that center column here, which gets us to Germany, which I thought I was really going to cheer up. And as I've been messaging you, Jay, to saying, maybe you were right in trusting us after we had screwed you all over. We Germans, you Jewish people, and you said, you know, we believe and you can make it again and you can make up for it. And I thought, you know, okay, we owe you that. So the AFD has been classified, as here reported by BBC, as one of the many news anchors, as being of right wing. And so almost of being unconstitutional, unfortunately now, and you come from the legal realm, Jay, can say the right words, but it's sort of a petition and it's been on hold or suspended to be basically implemented. So that's kind of the teardrop in that otherwise, smile I had on my mind. And then, so we covered pretty much now us, Jay, here away from you, Pedro, but now we want to hear, and that's why we almost started to make a show before the show, but then I said, hey, let's wait because that's the first slide, because we heard you had that pretty fancy event of a big power out. Tell us about how that affected everyone, and you started saying it affected you even more than anyone else already, and then we said, cut it here and let's share with everyone on air. So go ahead.
Okay, well, it's just because the electricity came back gradually to different parts of the country, and we got it back relatively late. I hear there's some people that got the electricity supply again very early in the morning. In our case, it came around 1 a.m., so it was still pretty late. So, it's interesting because I I didn't do anything as fancy as what we see in the pictures here, as attend a spontaneous unplugged concert in Gracia. I don't. But I had, for example, we had a candlelit dinner, something that is very unusual, no? And we had it on a weekday, and it was different, no? And even our son enjoyed it, and he said, "Oh yeah, I hope the light doesn't come until we finish having dinner."
And you would think, as it here points out, and again, thanks to Jay, Substack, and whenever all the other media drags me down, I'm getting my spirit back up. And so Substack, I saw it, I mean, I heard it, but I saw it first there. So it's captioning it here as being apocalypsing in Barcelona, freed from the screens for one fleeting, right? So you would think your son's generation and our sons are so addicted to it, they would have like a cold turkey, right? And sit there and shiver, right? Like junkies, but they're actually not. It's like more like detoxing as it sounds, right? And
I
I
heard
Mhm.
all the terraces were full of people having a beer, or maybe not a coffee, because I think the coffee you need electricity for the espresso machine. But
So, Jay, recently you were down for good reasons, what's going on around us. And you said, you know, public spaces used to be your thing, and you said, it's over and maybe, no hope anymore. But this should bring your hope back up, right? All we need to do is unplug, and then there we go again. This is agora on the street all over the place, right? And that's why I was actually relating it to our movement shift that we're on together with Tom, that I'm taking the students in the fall, which is about simplifying things and low-teching things. So we come to a point where we overdid it. Of course, not you, Jay. Without your ThinkTech, we wouldn't be able to talk about that here. But otherwise, technology everywhere else in daily life, it used to be that promise, for a better life, but it seemed to have come to a point where it's the opposite, that it's basically enslaving us, and we need to kind of try to strip away from it. That's at least, some of the thoughts that some people have. So that gets us back to Hawaii. One more slide, Pedro, so you can see some more promising context here from our news. Civil Beat is saying we joined other states to fight legally that we believe climate change is still and increasingly a real important thing. And also our topic of housing here, we're actually getting a new department, the DHLM, the Department of Housing and Land Management, that we're getting, and hopefully then we're addressing the things that we are talking about here. So then the only question is left, then how do we do that? And that gets us back, of course, to Barcelona. And quoting here, I think this is where we basically were departing last time, that quoting here The Guardian, so one more time, the UK press as the BBC before, that's how they're depicting here and saying, and this is even fellow Europeans. So when I go back to Germany, even we Germans and our neighbors across that pond, the Brits, we're looking up to you down there geographically. And they say here, this looks like how rich people live. And so this brought back the show quote on the top right is this urban parameter block corner I've been sharing and remembering. And my client was making us build it on a social housing budget to only then rent it out for the highest, charges. And that's sort of, dear client, thanks for that. Not nice. So, but you can build on a dime, and you should, and you can come up with. But once again, it needs this paradigm shift, because once again, the project they used for illustrating this point in The Guardian is the project that we already went through, which is the one for homeless women, which again, not everyone would agree to say, oh, this looks like how rich people live, right? This is not like you would think this looks like Mar-a-Lago or something, right? And even this one here is sort of the same, right? People not in architecture would say, this is a box, right? I don't want to live in a box. But this is how the box looks inside, as we have been talking about a lot. And I just added what we promised, the show quotes on the top right of what's going on in Hawaii here, that we had housing like that at the top left, social senior housing, and we have the breakers where we grow pineapples on the lanais, so the visitors can eat them. So this is just sort of reiterating what we said, but this we haven't shown. This is actually how you enter your building, right? And that looks very rich, literally and figuratively speaking. We also had a discussion kind of ignited through that. You guys went on after the show and you made a reference to even more northern up in Europe to Scandinavia. Jay, it was you, right? You made that. You want to share that question again? And so we can.
Well, I have had good experience talking with city officials in Helsinki, and I believe there's a certain culture and ethic in Helsinki and Finland that treats cities as a service, and the architecture is pretty good. You guys told me exactly where it fits on the scale of architecture in continental Europe, but I've always admired Scandinavian architecture.
And we said maybe Pedro, the kind of the social approach is one that they share, that their cultures are more about the we than the I. And so is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think there is a sense of Well, to be honest, I haven't been in Scandinavia personally, so I talk secondhand. But I get the impression that there are some things in common. You know, this sense of community and this. Um, I don't know. It's there is an affinity, and even there is. I noticed, for example, that when I write, for example, about buildings in Barcelona. And I noticed that one of the architects I come up like quoting as a reference the most is Alvar Aalto, for example. So I see a lot
Yeah,
of things
yeah.
about him, no, that are not exactly copied from him, but there's affinities, no.
Yeah. And even to materiality here, I mean, using wood, which they have a lot because they have a lot of forests, and using things in a raw way, right? Here we're putting makeup on everything, Jay. We just have that stupid high rise down the road going up there where the King's Alley was. And not only is it wrong in, like we talked about, we showed it in every way possible, in orientation, fenestration, habitation, all these stations is just totally wrong. And then adding to it, they paint over it, you know, and the concrete looks not much different than here, the ceiling inside of the entrance here, which they're just like, okay, show it, you know. This is comes to my mind, American architects of legendary status. That's Lou Kahn. You know, Lou Kahn was the one that basically showed the scars, and architectural historians were debating over that his own scars that he had from, because he was always searching for the light, and up down back to when he was a kid and they put like glowing coal into his coat and caught fire and burned him. So that's maybe too easy of a sort of a I guess a justification, but there might be something about it that he was just really interested in exposing things and not covering things up. And we, you know, this has something to do with values, right? With societal values, that if you have nothing to cover up, right, you might as well proudly show what you have. And if you're kind of ashamed of or feel bad, then you have used some substitute satisfaction, as I like to call that. And the makeup industry or plastic surgery industry is, so these are very, very sort of, you know, proud of themselves to be actually proletarian buildings, right? And that's what amazes people all over Europe and all over the world. It's like, wow, this, and look at this, look at the ceiling height. There's something that developers, they try to lower the ceiling because it's cost, right? Every inch or every centimeter in height. But there's a difference between climates, because once again, more in Scandinavia, which is more north than Germany is, that is where the thermal envelope, the facade that has to be triple pane, at least we thought that's what it needs to be these days. So that's going to be the square footage of that tripled glass that makes it so costly. The more you go into the temperate climates or the tropical climates, the less you need that. So all you basically have is a little bit of cubic, you know, inches of a little bit more concrete for the columns. So that's a big kind of difference here. And you know, you in Barcelona are still having the winters kind of damp and not freezing, but you know, you want to keep things more close than we here in Hawaii. So, you know, this is quite generous to afford such a tall ceiling height. And, you know, in the tropics, that's the key, right? You make the ceiling high, you have a ceiling fan, the heat doesn't get like up to your head. So that's like the vernacular way of staying cool, literally and figuratively speaking. So I really commend these projects here.
And of course, it also gives a more adequate scale
Yeah,
to these to the community spaces within the building,
yeah,
because these are community spaces, and basically the whole ground floor is
yeah.
areas for socializing, for children care, for things like this.
Yeah, and we used to do it here. And actually, recently, the one who did that the last was actually John Hara. I was just off the phone with Mayumi the other day at West Oahu, where he was the master planner and also the architect. We did a show with him about it, with both of them back then. You can look it up. And he also used CMU, so concrete masonry unit that's actually manufactured out there in Kapolei, Campbell Industrial Park. So that's a local material certainly not innocent because there's cement in there, but at least it's produced right there and you don't have big, trucking ways of getting it out there. John then unfortunately was then sort of decommissioned for continuing the campus, which is a shame, and we dedicated another show to that. And then came architects not from here, and they went more for a kind of a superficial approach. So I think it also, that being said, guys, I think it has to do with this sort of, that you predominantly have actually local architects, right? From there, I mean, you had Jean Nouvel, and every once in a while you have a star architect, coming and foster it as a tower or so. But you predominantly really put to work your local talents. That's fair to say, right, Pedro?
Yes, that is correct. There's mostly, and actually mostly like really local. I mean, a large number of these outstanding projects that we see in Barcelona or in the outskirts are done by Catalan architects.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's true that some architects, for example, the Garcia Marquez Library that won several prizes, that was done by a team from Madrid, for example. But it's almost, I would say, it's almost an exception.
Yeah. So this is actually now when you go online and look for your most recent, I mean, you might have in the meanwhile probably written another one. So, but it was the recent one fairly recently. So that's when you Google for it, that's what you get. And so that's how it starts. And tell us what the project is that you decided to be kind of the cover page project.
This is a project by a very interesting team called Perisantoral, which we probably mentioned in a previous show. They've done, I think it's one of the most uh, interesting teams active right now in Barcelona. They're relatively young still. Um, and they're kind of specializing in social housing. Not everything they do is social housing, but uh, maybe like 70-80% of their better known projects are social housing projects, and all of them have different levels of interest. They're not all the same, which is already a start, because sometimes you can think, oh, they found a formula, no, and they're repeating it everywhere around the city. And it's not the case. It's like each building seems to have a different approach. This one, for example, works based on the brick as a base material, and you can see that you have like these gaps between the bricks, so you have alternated solid walls with perforated walls, and then you have this space that actually looks pretty amazing. And when you look at it on a cross section, it's not really that big, or in other pictures. So there you can see it on the left side. You see it's like a triple height. It's not that big, and it's not that big in width either.
Here it is in plan. Yeah.
In the floor plan, it looks ridiculously narrow. And the
It,
sensation when you see the space is that it's much wider than it actually is. So you really get this. It's doing the maximum with the minimum.
yeah,
Creating
very.
the sensation that we have a very interesting and very attractive common space within the building. It's true that it only goes uh, in the upper floors. You don't connect directly to the space. Of course, you can access it. When the cross section, you see it only is occupies the four lower stories, and of course, like there you see the you have a little space, like a terrace on the upper floor that is also accessible for the public. None of these spaces are private. I mean, all of the usable spaces on the rooftops, etc., and or this are communal spaces. And then you have, for example, this double height. I don't know how to point it on the cross section, but it's as I said, no, it's a pretty simple building with a very rich solution. Rich, of course, not from an economic point of view, because it's everything is like relatively cheap here. And for example, the volume, just making a few changes in how the volume goes to have one side that's taller than the other. And then the windows, you can see that they're not aligned between the different floors. So this creates a kind of something that looks like a little more dynamic, no? Like, yeah, there you have a very nice facade, for example, no? So it's very interesting, and it's all based on a very few and very modest resources. You basically have two kinds of window, and then you have um, the perforated walls with brick, and that's basically it. And you just play with these. You move them a little around. You change slightly the apartments, which also gives certain flexibility. That means that according to the needs, one apartment might suit better for your needs than others. The shapes are also slightly different, but they're all more or less based on the same principle. You have a flexible connecting social space. You have one bathroom in each, and basically two bedrooms. And at least in most of the, I think there's some apartments that have a different number, but in this floor, for example, all of them have two bedrooms.
Yeah. And we have to say again, if hopefully architects watch us here in Hawaii, we it shouldn't be like, oh yeah, so let's order some brick, and do that too, because that's what Shift is looking at, is going back to the regional, as you said, not just the architects are regional, but the building materials are regional. So in over there is soil that is clay, so there is red soil, so you can actually make bricks relatively regionally. While here, Don Hibbert taught me once, we were going through Chinatown, there was some historic buildings in brick, and I said, did they ship this in? And he said, no, there's actually very marginal sources of clay here on our islands, which are majorly volcanic. So then you have a lot of bluestone, what you call it, which is a very sort of a less, the least aerated volcanic. But you have a little bit of clay, so these buildings are justified because one was just using. But if you would build something today, you for sure should not use brick, because the brick has to be shipped in from the mainland, so there's really no point. So what's the brick here has to be there with you, should be something different here. And certainly also, again, the climatic conditions aren't absolutely the same. So this is not a recipe that you can apply like a vaccination, for COVID all over the world and curing everyone the same way, right? This is really critical regionalism, as Kenneth Frampton was calling it a long time ago when he started to question the same recipe for everywhere all over the world. And this is increasingly true, that we really should look at what is our, what are our resources. We already talked about that we have wood here, and we used to have a wood tradition and technology, so we should sort of reactivate that. And that almost got us accidentally or intentionally actually back to kind of come full circles, because we started out many moons ago, and one can almost say years ago, many shows ago for sure, actually with tall buildings that we're basically torpedoed with here increasingly. So we jumped on these first to then actually deviate away and saying, actually the most ecological and economical is actually the perimeter block of several stories high. But again, you are also doing towers, and you didn't want to sort of conclude without sharing with us this tower here, right? And so that's upon your memory that you said, hey, how about this tower? So what is this tower? And I have to go closer. You will identify.
Yeah, I was having a hard time making sure it was the right one. I think, I'm not sure if we actually see that tower in that image, in that general image.
We picked the wrong one. Okay, then never mind. I think then my fault.
Can I go back for a minute, you guys? I want to go back.
Yeah.
My experience in Barcelona, which was in 1965 and also 1971, it was an 18th and 19th century city. There were no new buildings at all. You wanted new buildings, you had to go out to the suburbs. And the old buildings were old. They were courtyards and tenements and the like. So somewhere between then and now, we have this, and this is really remarkable. It's avant-garde. It is sensitive to the human condition. It is sensitive to the materials. So it's really admirable. But the question I put is, how do we knock down the old ones? In Honolulu, we have a lot of old buildings that get remodeled but not demolished, and that's a problem with the Department of Planning and Permitting. But how did it happen in Barcelona? Was there resistance to knocking down the old buildings? How much trouble, how much expense was it to demolish and come up with these new designs?
Most historical buildings are usually not demolished. The areas where this building, for example, is in the San Marti district. Specifically, it falls within the 22 at neighborhood development. That was mostly factories, and there are some apartment buildings, but actually the trend is to not to demolish these old buildings, but to try to recycle and improve them.
Yeah, which our last directly last shows were pointing out, and that's how I got to know you actually that year ago, because the tour we took with you was particularly about these buildings. So absolutely, yeah, Jay, I think the thing is, like, keep everything that you can, and you can keep actually more than you think. There's always these excuses. Actually, this many shows ahead, we will conclude, at least I offer, with Aloha Stadium. And I think I'm catching here people with these false claims of, oh, buildings are run down. Certainly true with Ward Warehouse. That was a solid timber building. And these solid logs, they now have their afterlife, not only in the Patagonia store on Ward Avenue, but Bunda told me somewhere in Montana and elsewhere. So there was nothing rotten away of these. What was rotten was the attitude. I was just reading about that this one billionaire is feeding into Howard Hughes, so they're going to get even more rich, and he wants to be like the new Warren Buffett, who just stepped down from Berkshire Hathaway. So it's all about basically that, while it's commercially driven. And so, but it should be culturally driven, and there's always a financial viability. I mean, these architectural firms have to make a living, right? The contractors have to make a living. Everyone has to make a living, but that seems to be succeeded, right? If you cut out the greediness of it and you say, I just take out of it what I need, but not exponentially more. That really seems to be, and that gets you really to the awareness of saying, keep in as much as you can, and really make great efforts, as you shared with us. And then, only then, if you can't, reuse something, you got to build something really new. But as you said, Jay, that's got to be really cutting edge and the best of these days, right?
Well, I look at some of those tall buildings that you had in the photograph, and I say to myself, as a comparison, no, not those are beautiful. I'm talking about the really tall residential properties. That the one in the far end of this photograph, for example.
Yeah.
And that has a useful. It costs plenty of money to put it up. It has a useful life of how many? 50, 100, 200, 500 years, a long time. And it may not be, as in Honolulu, it may not be all that appealing. There are a lot of mistakes made. But the mistakes are, may I say, carved in stone. And if you want to use the best of it, that's a project. And we have many, many of those buildings that have ruined our cityscape. And I wonder what happens in Barcelona, what should happen in Honolulu to deal with them. I don't know how you can, take the best parts when the whole thing is kind of a mess. And you may have to demolish it. And the cost of demolition is huge.
this year I promised to put in for the next show to illustrate what I'm talking about. There's a show about Howard Hughes', speaking of which, first attempt to do an affordable tower. That tower is called Ke Kilohana, whatever, they're hijacking Hawaiian names and doesn't matter. So that tower has to then, you know, the HOA fees in this tower, so the weekly, the monthly maintenance cost went up. So people who had barely been able to move in there had to move out and or sell. So this is really, really tragic. And they have, I was very optimistic because by that time, our dear sustainability hero, Howard Wigg, has been pushing through the DPP, and Tim Hugh, who was great at that time, that egress staircases, as we see one here, don't fall under the International Building Code, which comes from the mainland, and it's made for when in New York City there's a fire in your building and you need to get your ass out of there. And to prevent that, you get out of the fire, but then you break your neck because you slip on that metal grating of that metal staircase. That's understandable, but then Tim agreed in saying that ice we don't have here. So where's the point? All the towers from the mid-century that had open egress staircases, even high rises, they have all exterior staircases that go all the way up. Then came the invasive IBC and killed that. And then came Howard, who dragged me into the building code council meetings and said, I need someone else to pretend to be even more stupid than we already are. And we started to ask these questions when everyone else had their aloha shirts tucked in their pants and say, all items approved. We raised the hand and we said, oh, we don't quite understand. And Tim, smart guy he is, you know, he said, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but I understand why you pretend not to understand, right? And he said, so you guys shut up. So Howard and me, the two Howleys, so you shut up for a while, I'll give you something. And we were like, okay, what is that? And then he said, okay, I'm basically lifting the requirement of having to close egress staircases. And we're like, wow, this is really, really nice of you. Thank you very much. At that time, that Ke Kilohana was going up with an all exterior steel staircase. I was thinking, wow, they apply immediately, you know, Howard's brave achievement, but of course not. They didn't even hear about it or they don't care. But the answer to your question, Jay, is just take that shit off. These panels, just take them off. They put them on and you just put them off. And that gets us back to this. And then it looks like that. And that is one of the features of that building. And sorry, I screwed up. You know, I picked the wrong one for the panoramic view, but it was a good one because it gave you the chance, Jay, to say how these towers should not be. And we have many of these. These are the ones in Aiea that Rongstedt did at the end of his life, where he was like becoming a victim of greediness and he had been doing good stuff before. So let's go and check out this tower, but not like the conventional way from the macro to the micro. So let's do it the other way around and just look at the kind of the profanity in a good way of what this building is basically using, right? It's just using corrugated metal that in parts is perforated. That seems to be a theme, right? So there's no formal theme amongst Catalan architects, but there's a performative theme that there seems about mitigating the sun, right? And mitigating air. Is that right to say? Could that be a theme?
Yeah, that's correct. And this is also a material that is not particularly expensive and it's not like super luxurious. Again, it makes a lot of sense in this particular building because we're still talking about social housing. This building is a little older than the ones we've been watching. It's like I think it was completed in 2011, more or less. It's not so old either, but I mean, it's we've been seeing some projects that are maybe from last year or from the last couple of or the last 5 years, and it's really a great building. I mean, I know an elder lady in Barcelona that was looking for an apartment because this building is exclusively dedicated to elder citizens.
There you go, Jay.
And the apartments are relatively small because they assume that an elderly person will either live alone or in a couple. You know, they won't have their kids around anymore, etc. So the apartments are relatively small. but you have every few stories, you have some social spaces. So it's like a series of, we could say almost like neighborhoods put one on top of each other. And of course, since you have elevators, you can go to the other social spaces of the building. There's actually, for example, a rooftop space too. You can use all of them, but of course, there's always one social space that is closer to your apartment.
Yeah, and
And
this
they
is
use
yeah.
these color themes to distinguish the different areas. So you can live like in the green part of the building or in the yellow part of the building or things like that.
Yeah, this is, I know you're smiling, Jay. I know one of the reasons because you charged us with we should talk more about housing for the elderly, rightly so. And we have many shows pre-produced with Bundit and when Rich was still around and did a lot of coverage and did a lot of experimentation. And Bundit always, on the request of Rich in his 90s, in his mid 90s, was always saying, don't help me, because then I fall apart. I need to challenge myself, not just spiritually, because he took him to school and he was engaging with the students on a daily basis and they asked him questions. So he couldn't just sit in his rocking chair and fall apart mentally, right? He was always challenged all the time. The students were quizzing and was picking his brain, literally and figuratively speaking, and also physically. He always said, Bundit, don't help me up. And Bundit lives up on Punchbowl here in this beautiful mid-century, maisonette building. And there is a steep, you can take the driveway and there's also, you can leave your park downstairs and there's some steep stairs. And I have to throw these in these shows if I haven't them already. But this is, again, this is like, yeah, you can take the elevator, but you can also take the stairs to get your exercise as an elderly person. And again, this is what Howard has made Tim Hugh to bless us with. This we can do again in Honolulu, and we were able to do it for a while, but why has no one done it? They keep building, the developers keep building the same hideous hermetic staircases that you don't even want to look at, rather than not even be in there. They're horrible. So, and they're expensive because enclosure is costly. So it's ridiculous. And so this is something why we were saying, maybe the brick one you shouldn't and couldn't do exactly the same way, but this one here you could and should do in Honolulu just the same beautiful way. And let's look so this is illustrating what you were talking about, the communal spaces, right, Pedro?
Yeah. So they're usually the main. There's some smaller ones like the one in the next picture, but the main, you have like a main living room, communal living room, every few stories, and there are always these spectacular spaces with double height and with these great views.
Yeah.
You have a library in one of them, sewing machine.
Wow, yeah, I remember that. And rooftop gardens.
And the rooftop.
And this is certainly, I think, if you look close, this is astroturf, so never mind, don't do that. But other than that, again, the rooftops are, if you go to the Sky of Waikiki here on Kalakaua Avenue to this bar, you look down and you see all this untapped potential and resource of roofs that should and could all have green roofs. And without needing to be a structural engineer, which me being trained as a diploma engineer, so like the old title that you probably still carry too, right? You have a diploma engineer degree, right, from back in the days, Pedro. Well, you have your PhD in architectural and art history, of course, but I'm speaking about your architectural counterpart of of the old generation. Then before we adopted the bachelor and master stuff from America, that recognizes the engineering it. So what I'm trying to say is why you might not be able to put an intensive green roof, which needs a lot of soil and you can actually grow real tall stuff, but an extensive green roof, every building has the capacity, to carry that. So you basically, you keep the roof cool, you keep the, you fight the heat island effect around it, It's just a win, 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 win for everyone, right? And if there's bees and butterflies who win as well, so there's so many wins, right? So why again are we not doing these things is the question we're asking ourselves. This is a funny, kooky detail, right?
Yeah.
Of the building. So there's humor. Humor we also don't have anymore, right, Jay? Is that fair to say? The buildings here have no humor left. And the ones from mid-century, they are humorous. There are some kind of gimmicks and some kind of gags, but the ones of today are dead serious. So if you wondered how will this building then look from outside, that's how it looks. But again, it wasn't designed from outside in to look cool and then shoving function in there. But as you sharing with us, Pedro, it was designed from inside out, from the user being aged people, and then the unit size, keeping it small. Reminds me of Halle Manoa here by IMP, the most beautiful dorm that I'm worried about because it belongs to the national government. And then the book we're writing that we're getting to soon because you have been writing for the same publisher, Dome Publishers, and some of your Guiding Architects things have been published with Philip Moiser. So we're in the last days of getting ours done about Honolulu, and Halle Manoa is a prime piece that I fought over with Bill Chapman, who insisted to say, I'm going to write about it. I already did, and I want it in there. And I insisted, I want to write about it because I lived in there. And he says, I lived as well. So we like both write about it because it's so cool. It's in many ways, and there's a show about it as about almost everything by now. Well, never, it will never be about everything, but we have a lot covered. And so we have this tradition, here too, but we totally lost it. In fact, they're building a new dormitory right next to it. We showed that in a couple of shows ago, and it's absolutely blind. While this one here is doing that well. We see lanais wrapped all the way around. We see open circulation kind of nicely sort of inserted in it in a playful way. And then you have the beautiful communal spaces, both as enclosed ones, the one at the not very top left, but that's the one we were just in there. When you see this sort of sphere, lighting fixtures there. Mm-hmm. And then there's the open air ones, right? So depending on the season and on the weather, and depending on your mood or your age, right? Rich was always saying, oh, the older I get, the colder I am. And, you really got to, keep me warm. So that we know this as well, that people, increasingly then are more sensitive to cold. So this building seems to be able to provide that all in a very, variety of ways and in a very inclusive way. So yeah, lovely tower that we used to have, and we need them back. And so that's, whenever you tell people here all these old buildings, then people say, oh, they're old. We don't want old back. We want new. That's why we have to go half around the world to you in Barcelona and saying, okay, here is new. You want new, then, use that new. That's basically our trick, or at least tries to be.
The new that you should get.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of the value of a building like that, the one you just had on the screen, and it's still on the screen, is that it's not only for the people who live there. It's not only for its role, in the social society. It's for the individual who lives there to look at the building and stand there, for example, with a friend or associate and say, "That's my building, and it's beautiful." And it's a matter of sort of taking ownership of the building, of being proud of the building. And I think that's part of the value of a building like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I throw in these are all from Arc Daily here. And so at the bottom there, you see also a similarity to us here at H1, where the location of that, it seems like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but when I look at the pictures at that sort of freeway there, it's not a very scenic location that you would think like, oh, you're out there somewhere in the green or around Park Güell or something like that, right? This is a very kind of an peripheral, seems like outskirty. And then there is this, I always think when Queen Emma Gardens, as lovely of a building it is, or then one over Eva by Frank Slavsky, that social senior housing tower that's like a boomerang implant that's very much like this here as well. But I'm thinking, the location. I wish, there, when we were talking about Scandinavia, right, in Copenhagen, basically which you were a pioneer, Jay, together with Ben from McCully Bicycle, right? In Copenhagen, you have a city freeway for bicycles. So, we wish, and we said there's, that's something we still need to learn more from Copenhagen, but we're getting there. But what I try to say is that like maybe, 1B or 1C, as realtors call sort of like not prime locations, are not an excuse. In fact, probably the fact might be, or the reason might be, Pedro, that land is actually fairly reasonably achievable, affordable here, right? And they needed to be on a budget. And we call this here, Jay, the kind of the magic word is TOD, transit-oriented development, right? When you put a train station there, and then all of a sudden that will then ignite development in a beautiful community. Well, only if you go the extra mile of architecture. That's what we're pointing out here. That's where we're giving all these inspirations. Then yes. So that's all the TOD stations where we have a rail station, or we'll have one here, wants to have buildings like that.
Yeah, it's a location that we could say it's not the prime location within the city. It's right next to the. I don't know if you have a lot of these in Hawaii or in the U.S. I don't remember. It's like a peripheral highway that goes like around the city.
Yeah.
I know they have this in Paris and Madrid, for example, and here in Barcelona we have one too. So this is it, no? So this is the peripheral highway. So but the difference, for example, in Paris, when you go outside that highway, you're technically no longer in Paris. It doesn't work exactly that way in Barcelona. So it goes through, at some points, it extends to the neighboring cities, but in some parts, it goes through the city. And this would be, so it would still be Barcelona on the other side of the highway in this case, and it's this sunken highway. And in a lot of places of the city, it's interesting because they've started covering it. And there's some landscaping projects or some public buildings that have been built. And there's actually one that's not that far from here, from this location, where they design a library that partially covers this highway, a public library.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to awe you about how special we are here. We're totally different because, first of all, there's no other city to go to, and we have only one major interstate, and it's actually categorized by the Department of Transport as, so it's H1, so it's our main Interstate 1, but it goes nowhere but as far as you can go on the island, which is out west. So we literally have only this one artery, and whenever there's one traffic accident, it clogs up the whole thing. And they came up with surreal, there's this like caterpillar thing that can poop out some concrete blockers, and it can move them. So it can, like, depending where rush hour is, from going in or out, right? So, and then, but if that caterpillar kind of gets sick, which it did one time, then they couldn't get the part. They needed to ship it in or fly it in from the mainland. So for days, that interstate isn't anymore going anywhere where it isn't being winded. And that's why we too late started with that rail. But that rail in itself is rather questionable in the way it was done. And so it seems like we need a lot of inspiration. That's why we're so happy and thankful to have you, Pedro. And we should probably conclude it for now, but only to pick it up from here again and go a couple more shows with even more exciting stuff. I will then be adding to our diversity, and will broadcasting from closer to you, Pedro, because I will be back in Germany, in particular in Bavaria, and I will aloha from there. And then, Jay, you will be back in Honolulu, and have us, your foreign correspondents, to keep provoking and providing with imagination. How about that?
Well, Pedro, I hope that you can do what Martin is doing, that you could bring a bunch of students here to Honolulu and show them, right, show them in the reality of what is going on here. And that's a kind of reverse lesson. Don't do this and don't do that. And the other thing I just
I'm not
wanted
sure
to
the university would fund a trip to a place where we go to see things we shouldn't do.
Well, you should, in all honesty and in fairness, you should show them how good we were, which from a history point of view, right? You have your PhD in history and, in theory and in art and in architecture. So from that point of view, it is very valuable. It's just like we're still, absolutely puzzled why we lost it. But the tradition here is very, very rich. Mid-century modern is marvelous here on the island. That's why that was the time when UJ came here.
Well, let me just point one other thing out, Martin. When you make your trip in Europe, you should take a look at traffic circles and these peripheral highways. I remember Beaune in southeast France. It had a road around the outside, and that gave you a lot of options for the inside. And you could make it a walking city, which they did. And although I agree that the H1 and all the planning, the highway planning here in Oahu makes that impossible, the neighbor islands, it's still possible. And I personally feel the traffic circles and peripheral roads are a tremendous addition to city planning.
Absolutely. Okay, I will get that to the emerging generation. In fact, Dalen, who goes with us, has built a roundabout. Once I came to studio and he had built, we got to show this to you. So he's right on it. He's fascinated, not to say obsessed with these. Yeah, which is a good thing. Okay, then thank you guys, and thank you audience for watching us, and see you back in 2 weeks. That's our schedule. And then, broadcasting back from even more all over the world. Until then, stay happy and healthy. Bye-bye.